It's an exciting day. We are talking soul shift, where the dead go, and catching up with an amazing friend. He's an afterlife researcher and co founder of Helping Parents Heal, who I first met over 10 years ago. Hi, I'm Sandra Champlain, author of the book We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. And I'd like to welcome you to yet another episode of We Don't Die. Just a reminder, you can find my home base at wedon'tdie.com. We always have classes. We've got a free Sunday gathering inspirational service with medium demonstration included and all kinds of other good things. At the bottom of that page at wedon'tdie.com, if you want to enter your name and your email address, I've got all kinds of free goodies for you, including a free PDF copy of my book, We Don't Die. Our guest today is Mark Ireland, who is the author of Soul Shift, Finding Where the Dead Go, and also The Persistence of the Soul, both moving accounts of his journey to find answers after the passing of his youngest son. Mark is co-founder of Helping Parents Heal, an organization with more than 31,000 members that assist grieving parents. Plus, they celebrate the reality of the afterlife. Additionally, Mark has participated in mediumship research studies conducted by the University of Arizona and the University of Virginia. You can visit our friends at helpingparentsheal.org and visit Mark's site, markirelandauthor.com. Mark was one of my very first guests back on episode 16. And also we spoke to him not too long ago on episode 414. And I'm sure he'll keep us up to date on what's happening now with him. I'd like to say, Mark Ireland, a warm welcome back to We Don't Die.
Well, thank you, Sandra. It's great to be here. Boy, you've done a lot of episodes. I'll tell you that. Your platform here has really taken off.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to believe so many years have gone by since we first met. You want to tell people how we first met? Because I was a brand new author back then.
Mm-hmm.
And got to give the keynote speech. And you were one of the great people that I met.
Yeah, I think we were both at this conference. It was called Death and Dying or something like that. But it was, all about the kind of topics we get into. But we, take a little more positive light than the way that's described, I guess. But you did, you have that talk there. And I think we each had kind of a little table set up. And then we just interacted and spoke and we hit it off. And I think I gave you a copy of my book later on, then you read it on the flight back or something like that. And then I saw this really nice post you put up on Facebook back in the day. So yeah, it's been a long road for both of us. And here we are circling back around again.
I know. Well, I'm on your email list and you always have so much inspiration. I thought, it's time to catch up with Mark. Mark, if you don't mind dialing back over the years, and we have a lot of first-time listeners and viewers, and tell us your story before we get into what you're up to lately and your newest passions. Take your time.
This will be a little redundant for the people who have heard me before, but I need to cover the ground anyhow. So really, going back before I was even brought back into this field, I would just talk about my childhood, because I grew up with a father who was a pretty well-known, renowned psychic and medium back in the day, 60s, 70s, 80s, counseled celebrities and even the Eisenhowers, because I have a card from Amy Eisenhower addressed to my dad, dated 1956, congratulating him on behalf of the president for the marriage to my mom. So growing up with a father like that, this is all very natural to me. The idea that we're not just a body and a brain, but there's something more there, something spiritual underlying all of that. And we are really a soul operating in a physical world for a time being, for experience. Growing up with that father, you really couldn't get away with a lot. He knew everything that was going on, and he short-circuited things that he didn't want you doing. I had an older brother, 10 years older, so he got busted for, excuse my dad, but for, getting beer when he was underage and hot rodding his car and racing and things like that, which he didn't much appreciate. He said to my dad once, "How would you like to have a father like you?" And so anyhow, but what really touched me was I'd see my father. I've seen him hundreds of times during public demonstrations. Mainly, the ones were more focused on psychic phenomena, but the mediumship would pop through during those spontaneously. And when that would happen, he give very specific information, first, last names, and the nature of the relationship to the person, and just little tidbits that only those folks would know or understand, about whether it was something they did together or a hobby or whatever. And I was always really deeply touched, even as a child, to see that. And I thought, wow, there really is more. I just don't understand it or don't know how that works, but we are more than just this. So anyhow, going forward in life, though, as I grew up, I, went to college, got a degree, got married young, and took on a business career. Didn't really try to follow my father's footstep. That wasn't my bag. I didn't feel, it was more his. But my youngest son, Brandon, tragically passed at the age of 18 unexpectedly. And that really kind of drew me back in because one of the first things that gave me some comfort was just recalling those things. And then I reached out to an uncle who had similar abilities to my father because by that time my dad had passed. But this uncle asked if he could do anything to help me. And I just said, yeah, if you have any insights or connection that you could share, I'd really appreciate it pertaining to Brandon's well-being. So 3 days later, I'm in the mortuary and my uncle and I connect by cell phone. And he said, hey, Mark, I tried to meditate last night, but I didn't get anything. But this morning I was doing my morning meditation and your dad came to me. He wanted you to know that he was there when Brandon passed and he helped him adjust. Brandon was a little confused at first, but your dad helped him understand what was going on. And your son, Brandon, wanted you to know you're the best parents he ever could have had, which is the nice fuzzy thing we like to hear. But then he gave me the evidence because at the time we really didn't know the cause of death. And he shared, Mark, your dad said that Brandon's death was caused by a lack of oxygen in his bloodstream that causes heart to fail. And 2 days later, I talked to the physician who had conducted the autopsy, and she told me that Brandon had suffered a massive or severe asthma attack that drove his blood oxygen levels down, causing cardiac arrest. So my uncle gave me really the cause of death 2 days before that physician did, which was, even though it's hard to hear, it was a piece of evidence that was invaluable in the healing process to know that was a legitimate communication. And then things kind of expanded from there. And I started synchronistically meeting different people unexpectedly and just kind of unfolded to where, I've written a couple of books. I've had, sessions with a lot of top mediums. I've met some of the top researchers in the field on that end of things, even on the near-death experience area too. Like I got to interview Dr. Pim Von Lemmel, who's one of the top NDE researchers in the world a couple of years ago. And so it's just been quite an adventure for me since then and led to really trying to help other people cope with their grief and move on in a positive way so they can fulfill their life purpose.
That's a lot in a nutshell. A lot. I know your story and I read, well, your first book, not your second book, but you do a lot of giving. What would you say are some of the main things if you were to meet a parent? And I'd like to talk about helping parents heal, of course. But if somebody were just to meet up with you over coffee and they feel lost, maybe their child has transitioned, what would be some of the first things you would tell them about the reality of the afterlife or what direction to look in and what resources? And of course, please include the formation of helping parents heal.
Well, the reason Helping Parents Heal exists really is because we're the only organization of our type that allows an open discussion of spiritual experiences, afterlife evidence. So because of that, we've just exploded with growth. It's the hope element, really. I came up with what I call the 5 pillars of healing. And real quickly, they are, number one, support from family and friends. If you have that, not everybody does. Number two, getting to meet and interact with other people who have been through the same thing, forming relationships with them, because they're the only ones that can really understand what you've been through. Number three, when you're emotionally ready to provide service in some way, because when you give, it comes back to you, it helps you. Number four, letting go of feelings of guilt, but corresponding with that, letting go of anger directed at someone you're holding responsible for that passing in some way, whether it be a medical professional or accident related or whatever. I know that's not an easy thing to do. But what I commonly see is people holding on the guilt, like, I could have done this, I should have done that. I could have prevented this. And it's usually, very rarely would that ever be the case. It's usually not the case, and that you're just punishing yourself and there's no value in that. And then the fifth pillar is really being open to considering evidence for the afterlife, that we're not just a body, and the soul is something different than just the epiphenomena of the brain, creating this reality. Definitely, we have a brain, and our living in this body correlates to that. But I see it more as a sifter of consciousness, a filter that allows us to function in this world, to have experiences, and not the totality of who we are. Um, so it's not just the afterlife evidence. That's one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot more to the healing process. Person has to go through the grieving process, and it hurts. No matter what they know or believe or how much faith they have in those early stages, it's a partially a physiological thing they have to experience and go through. For some people, it's shorter. For some, it's longer. For us, it was relatively short, so to speak. But we had to get over that hump before we could actually help ourselves and then help other people too. But as far as, just afterlife evidence in general, I think there's such a wide range. You could look at one of these, like mediumship research that's been done, or even somebody having a medium reading and just seeing how profound that could be in their life with a vetted evidential medium, not just anybody holding up the sign saying they're a medium. That's one area. You've got the near-death experience research. You've got the reincarnation research, which has been done, like at the University of Virginia, initially by Dr. Ian Stevenson and then later by Jim Tucker. And like I said, the NDE research, there's a lot of people in that field. Bruce Grayson at the University of Virginia, and like Dr. Pim von Lommel, and there's a number of others as well. And then, the cases of deathbed visions, where these hospice workers are seeing this stuff all the time, where there's where the people who are on the verge of dying are seeing deceased loved ones come to them and preparing them. So there's just all these, and when you put it all together, it kind of forms this mosaic that is very compelling collectively. But even in and of itself, each one, I think, is very compelling. And people will have their own direct experiences too. And really, sometimes it's best for them to start with that, immediately after the passing of a loved one, because they may not be ready to get a mediumship reading right away. I typically suggest that they wait a few months. But even in looking at myself, I remember just days after Brandon passed, I wanted a personal connection of some sort. So I went into a darkened room and shut the door. It was actually a walk-in closet. So it was just pitch black. And then I closed my eyes and tried to get into a meditative state, just basically asking in a sort of prayerful way for some sort of connection. And while I was there, I had in my mind's eye, I saw a picture of my son, or his image of his face scrolling across, smiling, and I felt joyful, just like glowing, which really made me feel good. But then I got a surprise, because right after that was a cross with an oval loop at the top. And I'd seen people wear those, but didn't really know what they meant. So after I was done, I went and Googled it and found out, okay, that's called an Ankh. It's the oldest cross of human history, 5,000 years old approximately, from Egyptian culture, with the lower part representing physical life and the oval loop representing eternal life. So I felt I got a coded message that my son was joyful and in eternal life, whereas, I'm somewhat analytical too. So if I'd already known what that symbol meant, it would have been different, but I didn't. I had to go find out what it meant. So that was even more meaningful to me. But I think it's that evidence that gives us the hope element that really helps people's lives turn, and so they can have the strength to continue on and have a joyful life and meaningful life.
You've done so much and made such a difference. And I agree. Since we last spoke, I've talked to a lot of people, and those are all the top things I am into as well. And with near-death experience, more and more is coming out about these veridical or verifiable near-death experiences, whether it was someone who was blind, who could see something accurately, or somebody floating above their bed and they could tell exactly what happened in the operating room, et cetera. There's fascinating stories. So to just really submerge yourself in these experiences, to know that, our consciousness lives on. And that's why I'm grateful for great books like yours, that
One
friends
of my
that have.
favorite NDE cases is Dr. or Anita Morjani, who actually was at our conference last year. And I told her about this, and I said, this was to me the most compelling thing in your whole book. And it was when her body was lying comatose, cancer ridden, and on the verge of death. Her spirit had lifted out, her soul, spirit, whatever term you choose, and had gone down a hallway far away from the room where her body was, where her husband and the doctor were having a discussion, and she overheard this. And it was all basically the doctor explaining that the husband what was happening and that she was, going to die soon and all this stuff, a lot of specific information. Well, later she had this miraculous recovery, came out of it, and they reported verbatim pretty much what they had said in that conversation. So that kind of knocked out to me the argument that skeptics may have sometimes like, well, you're in the same room and you had some level of consciousness or whatever. You know, um, I mean, I don't think you need that level of defense because, like Dr. Pim von Lemmel said, many of these cases involve someone who's, basically got no heartbeat, no brain activity, no brainstem activity, yet they're able to report on these things that have taken place. But that one kind of just pushes all that aside. It's like, okay, this is nowhere near the hospital room. So how do you explain that?
I love those stories. I
Yeah.
remember hearing Dr. Eben Alexander talking about skeptics, and he says there's the open-minded skeptics and the closed-minded skeptics. And early on in my broadcasting, I wanted to get to everybody, right? But if
Yeah.
you're a closed-minded skeptic, there's not a single thing anybody could say to have you believe that this is real. The good news is we don't have to push on closed-minded skeptics because who our listeners are right now, they're open-minded, and we should all be skeptical because in any field there's people out there, and even let's say mediums, there's some untrained ones that take a little class and hang up the shingle and charge too much money, right? So I think that's in every field, but to just really understand and embrace that these people are out there, these experiences, you can listen to them, but we all have that voice of negativity, Mark, in our mind. We can
Mhm.
call it the ego or something else, whatever. How do we deal with that? It's good if we're skeptical, right? That's a good thing.
Mhm.
But sometimes it just won't shut up talking the negative.
I don't have a perfect answer for that, but I think if you have a meditative practice, that's great. The other thing you do is distract yourself. When those thoughts come in, just shift and do something else or get involved in something else, read something else, see something else, just divert your attention away from that. I have that periodically, not necessarily directed at this specific thing, but just like a negative thought or something that isn't constructive or helpful, And I find for myself, it's best to just shift my focus or attention and pick up my guitar, play something or work on a song or whatever. But yeah, I think open-minded skepticism is good. I have run into a couple of frauds, unfortunately. And even in my newest book, The Persistence of the Soul, I have a chapter really talking about that, the instance where I ran into one, and what I recommend for people in terms of, going forward is selecting a medium and also how to conduct a reading as a sitter in a way that you're going to get the best result and know that it's legitimate. But I do agree also that I've been testing actually mediums for over 10 years now for a certification program that I put together. And the sole purpose of this wasn't really to write science journals or anything else. It was really just to vet people who are lesser known so that I could refer grieving people to people on that list. And what I had found was early on, I had, when I started this whole thing, I met a lot of high end mediums that were well known, but, the good ones had like 6 month to a year wait lists, and some of the celebrity mediums charged more than some people could afford to pay. So I thought, there have to be other people who have this ability that are just lesser known. And that proved to be true. But, I would run them through a series of blinded readings on Zoom with no video and then record those and have them transcribed and graded for accuracy and for evidence. And as a result, we've got like over 40 people now on that list. So I have some experience in doing that. And I would say, like you mentioned, a lot of the folks who don't pass either are less experienced or they're a little deluded about the level of their ability. They think that they have this great amount of ability, or they just want it so bad, but it's not really who they are, you know? The people who are best at this really, I think, are born with it. I know anyone can be trained to develop it, but the very best ones seem to be born with it, or they have a switch flip in the middle of their life. Something opens that for them, whether it's some traumatic event, an accident, or whatever. But I think, like my dad, he was just born with it, you know? And I'd say there are other people, probably Gordon Smith was born with it. And I know other folks, you know, who are like that. There are some who have developed it to a good level too. But I just think more often than not, the very, very best ones, it's just an innate thing in who they are.
Yeah, I agree. And I've also seen people practice, 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 kind of like people gifted at a musical instrument, say the piano, and then those that practice, practice, practice. I've seen some darn good mediums come out practice. One thing I've been requesting of the mediums I've been interviewing lately is to offer that 10-minute guarantee. Just 10 minutes. And first 10 minutes, you should be able to know if you're getting some accurate information. And even from the medium's point of view, sometimes, there's just not the link there. So whatever reason that is, you can reschedule or perhaps, find another medium or something. But to really knock it up one more step is be willing. Just in those first few minutes, you should know if you have the connection or not. And the sitter should be able to feel like, my gosh, this is really my loved one. There's a fairly unknown medium that I had a reading with. I'm not going to mention names, but it was after my former boyfriend passed a couple of years ago. And even though we had been broken up for a couple of years, Mark, there was still, we were together for a long time.
Yeah.
And the words that she brought through, it was almost like he was sitting right here with us, giving her those information, the bits of information. And it's stuff nobody could know, nobody. And the joy that I felt was just tremendous. So a good medium reading can make such a difference. It truly can.
Yeah, when you
So
get those tidbits, those strong pieces of evidence, those little things, those are the biggest things of all.
They are. They absolutely are. I'd like to turn our direction a bit to helping parents heal. The formation of it, what it offers. I have been saying for a long time that there's 20,000 members, and now it's 31,000. I'm grateful so many people are coming aboard because these are all grieving parents, and to be able to be connected with an organization with so many resources. And if you're a parent, let me back up. If you're not a parent and you're listening to this right now, Helping Parents Heal has a YouTube channel that's open for everybody. And there's so much on there. So if I could talk a little bit about Helping Parents Heal, and then I want to
Yeah,
get
I think
into
we
your
might
books.
actually be over 35,000 now because that 31,000 number was last year. I'm not sure of the number now. I'd have to check with Elizabeth Boyson, who, along with me, she's the co-founder. We're co-founders of the organization. She's currently the president, and I'm the chairman of the board. So she runs the day-to-day operation. And then I help with the oversight piece for direction and so forth. But it all really started, if I go back to, I think it was early 2010. I was doing a workshop after my first book, Soul Shift, came out, and a woman approached me during a break, and her name is Suzanne Wilson, and she's actually really a high caliber medium, but I didn't know her at the time. And she says, "Hey, Mark, I just moved here from Florida to Arizona, and I came to this to meet like-minded people." And then she gave me a couple psychic tidbits, just to kind of show me that she had ability. She goes, "I'm actually a medium," and and then she had mentioned that, it's interesting that your son passed while climbing a mountain, because I met another woman whose son had passed on a mountain as well, and but it was in the Himalayas. And well, my son was in our backyard in Scottsdale, Arizona, in the McDowell Mountains. Anyhow, I said to her, I said, "Hey, give her, here's my book. Give her a copy of my book." And I signed it, and I gave her a little note and said, "If you want to talk, call me at this number." And it wasn't, I don't know, I can't remember exactly, but maybe a day or two later, I get a call from Elizabeth, and she says, "I read your book in one sitting or whatever, and I loved it, and I want to meet you and your wife." And so we met shortly thereafter. And she said, "I've got this Facebook group called Parents United in Loss." And wanted to have my very first in-person group meeting. Would you be my inaugural speaker? And I said, oh, sure, no problem. So I go to that, just 30 or 40 people, goes well. And then she starts having these meetings once a month. And I go to some, not all of them, but I go to when I can. And then it was maybe a year and a half later, I was uh, looking at a new career for a different company. And I was speaking to Tina Powers, another one of the medium friends that I had made over the years, out of Tucson, a really good medium. And Tina said, you know, Mark, I think your real mission in life is to help other parents who have been through what you've been through. So maybe you might want to think about starting an organization for bereaved parents. So I started mulling it over and I thought, well, you know what? There's no sense in reinventing the wheel. You know, Elizabeth already has something here, but the problem is it's just one group, one location. So, you know, maybe we could blueprint what she does in her meetings and have other places pop up in other cities and so forth to offer the same service. Also, she doesn't have a website and she doesn't have a newsletter. You know, if we put those things together, we might really have something. So I reached out to her and asked if she'd want to do that. And I suggested maybe a new name too, like Helping Parents Heal. And she goes, oh, I love that name. Let's do that. So that was really how it started. And the initial board was made up of the people who were in that first group. And then it just kind of changed over the years. And now, like I said, I think we've got 35,000-ish members worldwide, 170 maybe affiliate chapters worldwide, not just in the US. And also, we do a conference every other year. We had one in 24 in August. We skipped 25 because we just can't handle it all, the planning and execution. But the next one will be in 26. We drew 1,100 people to our last one. I think that's bigger than any of these other conferences that are going on these days. I mean, it's the capacity of the resort we get. It's the entire capacity. We have the whole thing. But that is probably the most healing thing of all. So I would say any parent who has been through this and is suffering and looking for some support and help, as soon as we announce that conference, I would sign up for that and get there because it's a great thing. You'll meet people who will become lifelong friends of yours who have been through the same thing. You'll see presentations that will blow your mind and give you great confidence and hope. So I'd say that's a key thing. And, you know, I don't know where the growth ends. Really, it's sad that we're needed, but it's good we're there to provide that resource for people. And last but not least, one of the things that we really noticed was that in general, men are kind of not really haven't been willing to engage in this very much. You know, it's been like 95% women in our organization. And I think that's where, you know, you get men with the idea like I have to be the tough, strong, silent person in this whole thing. And they're bottling everything up and suffering. And we started a subgroup called Helping Fathers Heal a number of years ago. It took a long time to get traction, but now it has huge traction. And that subgroup has really become a viable arm of Helping Parents Heal that's been very helpful for men. And I think, you know, allows them to talk to other men in the same boat so they can be very frank and open and cuss if they want to cuss or say whatever they want to say, you know, in their own subgroup. But there's other subgroups too now, like Helping Siblings Heal. So it just become bigger and bigger with more specialized areas for folks to participate in.
I try to interview all your folks that have books out and Mark Pitstick and the gang and Helping Fathers Heal and anything that I can do to help spread the word because there are so many good resources and anyone can just start. Go to helpingparentsheal.org. There's online resources if you can't make it to something live. And like I said, for those of you who are not parents that still want to take benefit of all these fantastic interviews and videos and things, you can go to YouTube and go to the YouTube channel, Helping Parents.
You can. And we have every week there's at least several Zoom interviews with either a medium doing gallery readings or therapists doing talks or, you know, other experts in other fields related to this that are there. So you really, to get live access to those, you have to become a member on Facebook. So there's a little protocol to go through because we're trying to make sure we don't have any infiltrators that aren't really bereaved parents getting in there, either to try and market their services, or, skeptics who want to try and, you know, debunk our mediums or whatever, which is really a pain in the what. But um, but despite those safeguards, I think it really provides a safe environment for the parents who go in there to know, you're able to post from the heart, and be able to read other people's posts, and in a very genuine and safe environment, and then have access to those live Zoom events and so forth. And then, or if you don't want to do that, yeah, like you said, you can just go to the YouTube channel and see a lot of these interviews that have been done over the years, some current ones and some going back a few years.
Yeah, I'm on one of those going back a few years.
Mhm.
Let's talk about your books. Soul Shift came out first. You want to talk about that? And then we'll talk about your newer book.
Yeah, Soul Shift was really my memoir. It was created through experiences that happened after Brandon passed. So really, it started with me um, going through that day, and how it really just exploded my world, and how painful that was. But then it really served as a catalyst for me to go back, reevaluate my childhood and what I saw with the father that I had. I mean, how lucky I was to have a father that gave me that level of confidence, that we are a soul, that we do continue on, as opposed to someone who just has to take a blind faith approach, you know, and hope that their religion is correct, So, and then it traveled into the synchronicities that happened, that all the things that lined up, and the experiences I had with both directly and with mediums. I would say early on, I told you about the issue with my uncle, and then it was like 3 weeks after, I was watching a news excerpt where they were talking about this mediumship study being done at the University of Arizona at the time, where they would test mediums under blinded conditions with people they didn't know. And the first one I saw was Alison Dubois, who later became famous because of the network show Medium. And she really did well. She was given a lot of specific information. This family, she couldn't see them. And then afterward, they debriefed with the family, and the family's like, yeah, she nailed it. This was right. And gave, what was the relevance of the statements to the deceased person. And I thought, wow, I'd love to get a reading from her. I'd love to be in that lab someday. And I didn't know this, but both things would later happen. And in fact, the very next day, a man named Jerry Concert from Dallas, Texas, who had known my father, called me, and he said, hey, Mark, I know what you've been through, and I know someone who might be able to help you. Her name's Alison Dubois. And here's a phone number you can call for a reading. So I'm like, okay, thanks, Dad. And then, I did get in that lab a year later for a Discovery Channel episode, which was pretty cool, with a different medium, Lori Campbell. But, and I just wanted to give a little tribute to Jerry Concert, that man who gave me that call, because he passed last August unexpectedly. And I just attended his celebration of life last week in San Antonio. So that was a real pleasure. And I met some other folks there who I'd never met before, who knew my father and who had some amazing stories. So I'm compiling all these stories of my dad now too. But back to Soul Shift. So that was like one of a number of things that lined up. I did have that reading with Allison later on. 2 weeks before that, a man who had known my father gave me a box that contained a typewritten manuscript called Your Psychic Potential, A Guide to Psychic Development, by Richard Ireland. I'm saying, what's this? And he goes, well, your dad gave me this for safekeeping before he passed, because you were out of state at the time. And I said, well, that's been 12 years ago. Why didn't you give that to me now? And he says, I don't know. I just feel like I'm supposed to. And then it was 2 weeks later, I had the reading with Allison. One of the first things she said to me was, your father is showing me a book, but I believe it's his book, but he's handing it to you to take forward. Does that make sense to you? So I'm like, oh, yeah. And then lo and behold, in 2011, I was able to get it published posthumously for my father.
Your Psychic Potential, for those of you who are listening.
Yeah.
He's holding up. That's beautiful.
So that was pretty cool. So to kind of carry on my dad's legacy. But I had a number of other readings, also some direct experiences. I think the most phenomenal one was probably involving my wife 6 months after the passing of Brandon. We had gone on a 7-day cruise, and it was intended to celebrate Brandon's graduation from high school. But since he couldn't physically go with us, we took our older son, Stephen, and Brandon's best buddy, Stu. The day that we got back, my wife went into our bedroom and sat at the foot of our bed, and all of a sudden felt a presence with her and could see Brandon as a shadow figure out of her peripheral vision. And she just was so overwhelmed. But what was really confirming about this was the very next day we got a call from a friend named James Linton, who had borrowed Brandon's bass guitar before he left because James was a musician and he had his own in-home studio. So he called Susie out of the blue with no knowledge of what she'd experienced, saying, "Susie, I've got something to tell you, but I'm not sure how to tell you." And he says, I was in the studio recording this song and I felt another presence in there with me. And I saw a shadow figure out of my peripheral vision. And then I saw flashes of white light and I thought I was hallucinating. So he said he got water, he took a shower, he got food, but every time he came back, it got stronger and stronger until he finally said, "Okay, Brandon, what do you want?" And then he felt guided to redo the bass line and lyrics to this song. And he said, it's called The Other Side. He goes, "This is the best song I've ever written, but I didn't write it." So that was pretty phenomenal. Whether or not you believe in automatic writing and the idea of channeling, I do, but whether you do or not, the fact that he had an identical experience with my wife the very next day with no knowledge of hers, I think is pretty compelling. And then there were other sessions and other things, but really it was kind of my own personal journey that took place. The next book, The Persistence of the Soul, really is a deeper dive into this. So I still have the personal experiences and many new ones that are pretty profound, actually. But in addition, what I put in that is it's like a scholarly book because I add in the research. So I share an experience and then I talk about the research supporting that, whether it's been done, a long time ago by the SPR or more recently by like the Windbridge Research Institute, Windbridge Research Center, or University of Virginia, or Scottish Society of Psychical Research, my friend Tricia Robertson. So that one really, I'd say that if you can read them sequentially, I think that it'll go perfectly. If you're more left brain science minded and you want what's the scientific evidence for this stuff along with your stories, the second book might be more your cup of tea. For people who love the personal stories and that emotional part of it more, I think the first book, Soul Shift, would be more for them. But they do go hand in glove if you want to read them both. I would just read Soul Shift first in that case.
Absolutely. And you can find your books, well, wherever you buy books, but also markirelandauthor.com. And also
I've got links to the books on there just to make it easy for people.
Yeah, we like easy. And also
Yeah.
your dad's book as well. What gives you the most passion now? Because I know you send out the newsletter quite often. What are you passionate about? What gives you excitement?
I like doing these for one thing. I mean, I really enjoy talking and having discussions and deep discussions with people about these kind of phenomena. And, I'd say other things just like ideas for doing new sorts of research or other kinds of ways to provide validation that there is life after death. Or I don't even want to phrase it that way. It's just like there's a continuity of life. We're just experiencing one aspect of life in a physical body, but I just think it's a continuum. Just like I guess when people die here, they're embraced on the other side, like a newborn would be embraced here when they're leaving. If you believe in pre-existence, which I tend to be that way, if the soul existed before it gets here, they're being born in this world. And then when they're dying, they're being born into the next world kind of, and people are waiting there for them that way. But I think new and different types of research interest me. So I've tried to think of ways, that we could do that. There is one experiment that Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia put together years ago that's never been solved. And I'm doing my best to work with some folks to see if we can crack that. It's probably very, very, very difficult the way he formatted it. But what he did was, before he died, he took a combination lock and set it to a lockbox. And inside the lockbox is a bunch of stuff. No one knows what's in there. But if it ever gets open, we'll find out what he left behind, But what he did was, it's a 6-digit code that has to be open to open the lock. But what he correlated that to either a word or a phrase. So either a 6-letter or more words. But if it's more than 6 letters, the first 6 letters would be decoded into numbers on a decoding sheet that he left behind. Or if it's like, say, 8 words, it would just be the first 6 numbers or it could be exactly 6 letters, or it could be a 6 phrase word, and then it would be the first letter from each word. So, the way he constructed it, it's just phenomenally difficult because there's so many possibilities. And no, I don't think he probably didn't really know how mediums worked as well. I'm just guessing because his area of expertise was reincarnation primarily. But I know how mediums work. And for the most part, it's either a thought comes into their mind, like they'll say they're clairaudient, they hear. Most times it's not an audio a signal they're getting, it's an idea pops in. And I've had this myself, so I know what it feels like, not all the time, but I have had it, so I have a sense for it. It's an idea or a thought pops in. So it's a little difficult. It's going to be like some 6 word phrase or something crazy. That's going to make it pretty darn difficult, as opposed to like if they could get an image of something too, like if it's an image of something that's recognizable, that's a 6 letter word, that would be probably what I would have suggested for him to do. But I'm working on trying to crack this thing. I don't know if it's going to get cracked or not, but we're giving it a go. It's kind of fun. But even if it doesn't work, I think maybe it could provide an idea for another one that's more like what I'm describing, where, okay, maybe it's just make it 1 word and that you could get an image to somebody, a medium, so the image conveys them the word to say, and then the word correlates to the decoding of the numbers or something like that. The other thing with this that makes it difficult is because mediums typically say like the best readings I'll have is with somebody where there's a loving connection with the deceased and the living person. So if you make it too sterile, like this is pretty sterile, it's pretty far removed, to where you don't necessarily have that kind of energetic, loving connection as much. I have an idea how I'm going to try and address this, but I'll save that in case it works and then I'll explain it. But I think that's one of the hurdles with this type of experiment too, because it's like, look, if you can't have that, I don't know that he has any living family left, or even if he did, would they be willing to have a reading? Was that loving relationship real strong, whatever. But I think that's one of the hurdles. So I think in devising any kind of experiment like this going forward, you really have to take those things into account. The other thing is you have to find mediums that are really, really good and that are willing to try and do this, because a lot of them be like, I'm not going to bother with that. I don't need to prove this to anyone. I'm here to help people who are in grief, that kind of thing. Some are willing and some aren't, but I think that, if somebody has a year-long wait list, they're probably not going to, say, okay, or these things don't usually work and here's why. I think Linda Williamson in England once, when I was trying an experiment of my own that's detailed in Persistence of the Soul, gave me some feedback about that, because I had tried one involving my sister after her passing, where she left behind a secret message inside a sealed envelope. And then I tried to get from the different mediums, what was in the envelope. And I would just say it was a partial success in my view at the end. Not the perfect success I wanted, but Linda had said too, it needs to be something that is conveyed through the loving relationship with the person who passed and the surviving person, but also needs to be something that could be identified by the medium. Each medium kind of has their own Rolodex of images and thoughts and things that the spirit world taps into to figure out, okay, how am I going to convey this to them? I have to use their own personal Rolodex. So it might be like if a person's named John, then they show the medium the face of someone they know whose name is John. Even if it's not the same John, they know to say John. You know what I'm saying? So I'm kind of bouncing around here, but those are some of the things that interest me going forward. And also, I am working on another book. It's been slow going, but it's going to be about what it was like for me growing up with a father that I had, and some more of those stories, along with accounts shared by other people who I've met over the years. Some of them pretty fascinating. And if you want, I'll share one of them.
Yes, I'd love it.
Okay. So this one really makes you scratch your head when you think about the nature of time and our perception of what time is. I had a talk a number of years ago when I was launching one of my books. And before I started, a woman approached me and she says, "Hey, Mark, my name's Norma Poling, and I saw your dad a number of years ago, and I have a story to tell you." She actually gave me a printed copy of it, but then she told it to me too. And now, for those who don't know, my father would do a psychic demonstration where he would take 10 strips of Johnson Johnson medical tape, which, if you're not familiar with, is extremely strong adhesive. I mean, it adheres very strong. He put that over his eyes, and then 3 black opaque blindfolds that you could not see through, and then more tape down below his eyes so no one could say that there's some way he could see down. And then he would ask people to write messages on pieces of paper and send them up, and then he would touch them and he would answer them. Um, and usually he went far beyond what was ever on the paper anyhow. So even if he could see, it wouldn't matter. You wouldn't be able to give people that kind of level of information. He could give people serial numbers off of bills that they would send up, even if they were in sealed envelopes and things like that. But anyhow, this woman, Norma Poling, went to see my dad. She says, I saw your dad in 1963. And he said, to write a paper and ask a question. And I thought, should I ask whether I'll get my master's degree, or should I ask, will I have a 4th child? And so she only wrote down, will I get my master's degree? She sent the question up, and at the end, my dad answered her and said, yes, you'll get your master's degree. And she said, oh, that's great. She didn't know if she really would or not, but she later did. She then said, I didn't see your dad for 5 years, but I came back 5 years later in 1968. Excuse me. And same thing, but he asked us to write a question. I thought, I wrote an entirely new question, and I wrote my name, Norma Poling, and I set it up. And then your dad got my question while he's taped and blindfolded and said, oh, Norma Poling. Oh, I see you had that 4th child.
Wow.
So that's the thing she thought of 5 years earlier, never even wrote down.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot more to the universe than we know or can understand. I mean, so that's one of the types of stories that'll be in there. I have probably dozens of those kinds of things from people. I just learned a new one last week from a gentleman who's a geologist who worked with Jerry Concert, who I mentioned before, who was into oil exploration, and my dad helped them target maps like where reserves could be found and things like that. So anyhow, I've had an unusual life with the fathers that I had, and I'm embarking on my own path now. I'm kind of in a joint venture to preserve his legacy, but also to do this other part, which is really my own thing and my own passion, ultimately to really try and help people.
That's the common denominator there. We need to keep interested ourselves. I will continue to talk to people about the afterlife and the different reasons to believe, but I keep digging in myself. And you'd mentioned your father and the 4th child. On not every Friday, but I work very closely with a trance medium named Scott Milligan, and we do sitting for healing. It's free. We send healing all over the world. And then as a trance medium, he'll go into trance and we can ask questions of his spirit friend, who will talk like an old English voice. And we can ask any question, life, death, and the afterlife. Well, people type their questions in the Q&A box on Zoom. Scott's eyes are closed. He's busy talking, or his Eric is his name that speaks through him. Well, what happens so often is Eric will ask a question before I have an opportunity to ask it. And it's, okay, Scott's eyes are closed. He's either reading my mind or he couldn't see through the screen. And he says, I know the people that are here and I know the questions that are in their heart. And that's amazing. And I had sat in Scott's home circle once in England, and I had a few questions on my mind. They answered them before I could even ask. And to talk about the intelligence of the spirit world. So I love that. And so we're in the process of putting together a book of questions and answers with Eric, but I love it. And then another thing that I'd like to talk to Elizabeth maybe about, you folks with helping parents heal, interviewing this fella. But many years ago, you'll remember Al Botkin did the work with induced after-death communication, IADC therapy using eye movements, which is now the EMDR, the eye movements, is the gold standard treating people with PTSD. There are therapists all over the world that are doing this with people, but there's a wonderful doctor in Adelaide, Australia named Dr. Tom Nemi, who heard my episodes with Dr. Botkin on We Don't Die. And he's listening that can eye movements really help people with grief? And so many people get reunited with their loved ones in the afterlife having these sessions. And he said, it sounds too good to be true, but he had to follow through because he said, as a psychologist, people would come to him with grief. And of course, there's only so many tools that you can use with people, but they're still very sad and there's a lot of pain. So not only did he learn this, but he conducted a study at a university there in Australia. And sure enough, almost 100% of people would have their grief greatly reduced, and 75% of them would experience their deceased loved one. So this is now just a few weeks, right, that I've been really investigating. And I interviewed him several episodes ago, Dr. Tom Neamy. He's great. And I asked him, I said, can I do these sessions? Would I be able to do it? And so just this past couple of days, I had the 2 90-minute sessions with him, Mark. And unfortunately, the only way to get through this is to actually relive the grief.
Okay.
You recall things and you get to the most emotional state you can, which is tough.
Mhm.
Not everybody wants to do it, but that's how you dislodge the pain from the memory. And so I would talk about some memory and I was crying my eyes out. But then he had on his computer screen, I could see it on mine, a ball that was going back and forth, and we'd do these eye movements, and then I would close my eyes. And he's funny. He says it's like the game whack-a-mole. Another memory will come up with more grief, more emotion, and we just kept hammering him over and over and over. And what happened was I would go back into the memory, and it wouldn't cause any pain or discomfort. I thought, now, isn't that interesting? So my analytical mind's thinking, do I want this to be true? Is that why this is working? So on day 2, we had to go back through the memories just to see if there's any more bits of unprocessed grief. And sure enough, there was, little things that came up. But at a certain point, I couldn't find any more. And so then I got an opportunity to, and this was my own creation, just talk to my dad and what I'd like to say. And then we do the eye movements. Well, this was the coolest thing because in a little while, we would just do the eye movements. I would have happy memories of my dad. And like a slideshow, I almost witnessed my life as a kid from his eyes, all the little, I would make him like an ashtray, even though he didn't smoke, and pencil holder. And I could feel him being proud of me, and I could feel his love. And then all of a sudden there was a slideshow that happened so quick. Like my mind couldn't take a time to create this, but it was loved ones who had passed. And there were even people that I didn't know that came. And then all of a sudden I got this feeling like they were all standing right behind me, like I'm not alone. And that was a transformative experience. And I'm thinking, I want to get this out to as many therapists as possible to take this training and just to be able to offer it. Yes, it's nice to have that feeling of loved ones, but what's even better is, it's been a couple of days now and I've really tried to dig up some of the sadness. It's not there. What's there are the memories, joyful memories, all that, those don't go away. But anyone who's experienced that deep, dark, horrific grief can't find it. So that's my latest. I'm reading every book I can on it. And yeah, I want to be able to share.
That's awesome.
Dr. Tom.
I remember Botkin saying it was EMDR, but he had some slight tweak to the process.
He did.
And I'm wondering what that is.
Yeah, it's a little extra. It's a little extra going beyond the point when you think, you've had enough for
so he would just keep going then.
Yeah. Well, it's a little extra than that.
Okay.
And when you're in it, because Dr. Botkin wrote the foreword to Tom Neamy's book.
Oh,
and
nice.
Dr. Botkin is now retired, and he is so happy that somebody is taking the ball and running with it because it is such profound therapy. It really is. And so, you got to be in the present moment to do it. Turn off the analytical brain because, my mind's trying to figure it out. So I'm like, no, be present, come up with the memories. And it's tough to do. And not everybody is willing to dig deep into, reliving some of those painful moments. But I don't know how it works. And I know it works again for PTSD. It's the gold standard. And
it works on Zoom?
Yeah, it works on Zoom. And it's not just the eye movements. You can also cross your arms and you tap.
Okay.
Do that with the um, working. I
Well,
want
I'm
to
very interested in this because I know there are some parents who, no matter what, we offer, it's still never enough. And I think this kind of thing could maybe be the breakthrough for them, those that never can get out of that deep hole. And
Yep.
that's very few, but there are some. Um, and I have a story to tell you about a couple I know in San Francisco who went through this, but it was someone else who did it. I can't remember the name of the practitioner, but it was interesting because the father went first, and it took him a really long time, like hours, to get to the point where he got into that. But he did break through, and he saw his son and communicated with the son. And the son said, "Dad, this isn't going to work for mom." And then he said, "Ask mom about the color code book." And then when his session was done, he didn't say anything to the wife because he didn't want to influence her. She went in, it didn't work for her. Then she came out, and he said, "Is there something about a color code book?" And she goes, "Well, yeah, before her son passed, I bought this book and we were discussing it. It was about different colors and how they correlate to different emotions." So that was pretty wild, to get that level of a specific reference that could be validated after the fact. So that told him, like, this was a real encounter.
Absolutely. And I can't think of the title of Dr. Tom Nemi's book, but Inspired Life, Beautiful Death, something like that. People can just look back a few episodes of this show, but he's got so many case examples of those kind of things. And there's even verifiable ones, like that's a verifiable bit of evidence, because
Right.
people in that state, they're able to sometimes bring back information that no one else could. So you're like me. We want to share and we want to keep learning, and then we keep
Yeah.
sharing.
Yeah. I
I
don't think
love
we've hit
this.
the end of the road in terms of figuring stuff out and, finding other, means of healing, of helping people heal, but also other forms of evidence we haven't considered or other ways to explore that. And to me, that's kind of an area of passion that seems like fun, to keep me motivated too, to do more.
Yeah, we always need that. Well, Mark, any closing thoughts for the day? Being here for the third time, I'm so happy that we got
Mhm.
to connect. This is a great conversation.
I may be redundant in saying this, but I just think, we're all here for a purpose, whether we know it or not or remember it. So it's good, if we have to go through suffering, which we all will at some point in our life suffer in some way, but just hang in there and get through that, because you have a reason for being here and see that through. It'll be worth it in the end.
It'll be worth it in the end. Well, Mark, thank you for being our guest today.
Thanks for having me back. We'll talk
Oh,
soon.
it's been great. And for our listener or our viewer, check out Mark's books, Soul Shift, Finding Where the Dead Go, and The Persistence of the Soul. I always recommend our friends at helpingparentsheal.org. And you can go directly to Mark's site, find the books, and so much more at markirelandauthor.com. So I want to thank our listener or our viewer for taking your precious time and being here today. I hope you were on the edge of your seat like I was. I really enjoyed it. As a reminder, come visit me at wedon'tdie.com. Lots there to explore. If you really want to know a lot about the afterlife, you're super passionate, I now have a Patreon community with all episodes of between this show and my show on iHeartRadio, which is Shades of the Afterlife. I'm a reporter on the afterlife on that one. There's over 700 total episodes. So for any donation, small or large, you can be part of that community and you'll get a list of all the episodes I've ever done. You can click on them, listen to them, enjoy them, and there's so much more. Of course, we have our free Sunday gathering, inspirational service with medium demonstration included, and we get 150 to 200 people from all around the world. Every Sunday happens 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. UK. They're all recorded. They all go on Zoom. So come join us. Again, wedon'tdie.com. So in closing, I'm Sandra Champlain. I'm always so happy to be your host on We Don't Die. I do believe that our life is very important and that our life is an education for the soul. Our life matters. We can make a difference with others. We're here to learn. We're here to follow our passions, and we're here to share. And let's have a little fun while we're at it. So I really want to thank you for listening or for watching, and we'll see you again soon.